Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting episode of the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on American Freedom Radio for the listening pleasure of the Five Eyes Network, with all the King's horses and all the King's men, couldn't find some guy who'd been to like 12 war zones in a couple of years on money that was untraceable. So, you know, it's a suspicious incident, and a lot of people are dead here, and the grief down there in Christchurch is absolutely palpable. But that's not necessarily what we're here to talk about today. Today we're here to talk about the Prime Sinister, Jacinda Ardern, or as I like to call her, the Ardern criminal. And if anybody wants to judge me on that statement there, allow me to back up my case. There's a video called Jacinda Ardern Exposed in 7 minutes or less. If you've got a rebuttal for the entire thing that's going to last less than 7 minutes, watch that video first and save the rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen. There's a heck of a lot to know. So, my very special guest joining me on today is Ed Dutton. Ed, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
I'm quite pleased to have you here, in fact. So what have you got for us today?
Well, I suppose I got thinking a lot about your Prime Minister, about Jacinda Ardern. And I was just, I mean, obviously it was appalling what happened in Christchurch, but it was also particularly, in a weird way, fascinating. I found her response very interesting. As far as I can see, she's to put it bluntly, she's a deeply mentally unstable woman. And I would have thought that she would be the worst possible person to be running a country in a time of crisis. And that's what she's doing. She's running a country in a time of crisis. And
what's she shown you? What behaviours made you think she was a deeply mentally unstable woman?
She is on record.
Before we go into that, there's just one question I want to know. Are we talking Hillary Clinton crazy or Nancy Pelosi crazy?
I'm not familiar with their levels of craziness, and
that's the point, actually, because nobody's familiar with the level of the craziness because it's yet to be seen.
Well, that perhaps may be the case, but with Jacinda Ardern, I think it has been very clearly seen. I think that for the Prime Minister to break down, as she did a week after the events, and start crying in public is a sign of something not being quite right. I think for her, for reasons I'll look at in a minute, for her to wear that headscarf as she did and encourage other people in official positions and whatever in New Zealand to do so is not quite right. I think that many things about her are not quite right. I'm sure she's a very lovely person. I mean, she seems to be a very altruistic person, but there's a degree to which, when a country has serious problems, altruism is not what you need, and this is perhaps one of the altruism is certainly not what you need at a time of war, and in general, I would think it's not what you need at a time of crisis. Altruism has its place; it's a wonderful thing, but there's such a thing as being too altruistic, and that can cause and when that's combined with being anxious and having anxiety, being depressed, then you have serious problems. I mean, there are some great female leaders we've had. Okay, I mean, there's Bodicea, there's Mrs. Thatcher, but one of the things I give away my political sympathies there, perhaps. But one of the things that characterises these female leaders is they tend to be quite masculine in their personality traits. This is why someone like Mrs. Thatcher was able to take Britain to war. Under previous administrations, when Jim Callaghan was in charge in the 70s, the Argentinians invaded an island that was near the Falklands, and nothing was done about it. It was just hushed up. Whereas Mrs. Thatcher wasn't taking this nonsense, because Mrs. Thatcher was very atypical for a woman, and that's one of the reasons that she ascended to the position that she did. And she had more balls than most of the men, I think. Whereas it strikes me that Jacinda Ardern is very typical for a woman. And you're in this unlikely. Women are higher in conscientiousness than men, which means that there's a degree to which they have higher sort of impulse control. That's why women will do well in the education system and get into university and that kind of thing. They work harder than men do. They are higher in what's called agreeableness than men. They're high in altruism and empathy. They feel empathy for other people more strongly than do men. And that has its place, of course. That can be a very good thing. But in certain situations, I'm afraid that can be a bad thing.
Can I also define that? Because somebody was talking about the difference. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Empathy means you actually feel it. Sympathy means you probably should feel it, but you can't actually feel anything. But I sympathise.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Empathy means you're feeling what they're feeling. You have that capacity, and I think Jacinda Ardern has that capacity. She doesn't come across to me as a faker, which perhaps Hillary Clinton is. I don't know. But also the other thing that females are higher in than men is what's called neuroticism, i.e., mental instability, and in particular anxiety, worrying about things, worrying about the future. And it suggested this was useful in terms of mothering and in terms of taking care of children and so on. That's why it's been selected for in females. Now and what it seems to me that she's done is she's managed to ascend to this position of being in charge of New Zealand, at least de jure, and inculcate an entire nation, or parts of an entire nation anyway, with these feelings. We can look at the theory behind later, but I've been one of the things that particularly fascinated me about her, and I was very surprised it was never discussed maybe it was discussed in media in New Zealand, but it wasn't discussed in Britain or I read the British newspapers, was that she was Mormon, and her background is Mormon.
She was until she gave up her Mormonism at a time when there was some conflict over gay rights issues in New Zealand, and so she gave up her religion in order to support the gay rights because the church's view on that didn't reflect her views. That's the story.
Indeed, but my original degree was in theology and religious studies, and my supervisor was the world expert on Mormonism, and I learned a great deal about Mormonism. I know many Mormons personally, and they're very nice people in my experience. But this is it's a very strict, countercultural, separate religion. And if you are a Mormon, and in particular a Mormon that has what they call the degree of glory, which she does, i.e. a practicing Mormon, a tithing Mormon, a Mormon that is married in the temple if they get married, this is a huge sense of who you are. This is central to your sense of self. All the rituals they have to go through, they even wear special undergarments and so on. After a certain age, they don't drink coffee, they don't drink alcohol. It's entirely countercultural. And to give up on that, to abandon the celestial heaven, as it's known, the heaven that only Mormons go to, in favour of, she's saying she's agnostic these days, so she doesn't believe in God, so she wouldn't even go to the terrestrial or celestial heaven. She'd go to the outer darkness. Is a big thing, and people that undergo fundamental changes in identity like that tend to be mentally unstable. And this was something which William James, the American philosopher and psychologist, did a great deal of research into. It's called the religion of the sick soul. So you get people whose identity slowly changes throughout the lifespan, and you get those who undergo a central change, as she did, i.e., she left the church. And this is a sign of you don't even need to speculate on it. She's on record. So there was an interview in The Guardian, in the newspaper. It's called "I've Got What It Takes," on September the 15th, 2017, and she said she had a concern that her anxiety would preclude her from the top job. The condition of her anxiety had, in her words, ballooned during her time as Deputy Prime Minister. So she's openly saying that she suffers from anxiety. She said in the interview, when you're a little bit of an anxious person, you constantly worry about things. There comes a point where certain jobs are just really bad for you. She said in, is it the New Zealand website called the News Hub, that there have been lots of rumours about her health, and there have been people saying that she had spent time in a psychiatric hospital, which of course, and there were apparently members of Parliament who, off the record, had said this. And she sort of joked it off and said, I had tonsillitis. And it was suggested, release your medical records then. And of course, she didn't do so. There are many other remarks that I've noted that she's made about this. She's this thing about how she won't say the name of this, what's his name, Brendan Tarrant or something. That's the shooter in Christchurch. And this is
Brenton with a T.
Brenton Tarrant. This
and
Australian.
also the the Offensive Materials Act and that kind of thing that's come into effect since this attack means I'm not even sure if we can legally speak his name without going to jail for up to 14 years with up to a $200,000 fine. That's,
you can't legally speak his name.
No. That's the thing. I'm not sure. I know you can't talk. You can't even reference the document that he wrote. Like now, people who are talking about his manifesto or something like that. You know, it's crazy. I've had the police visit my place 3, possibly 4 times in 3 or 4 days. Right, so it was very, very scary at this point in time. Anybody who watches the video, shares the video, anybody who analyzes the video, tries to promote it.
I watched the video on the day.
Oh, but you're not in New Zealand.
And I think there was a degree to which it was silly not to, because there were newspaper articles out saying, "Oh, this person is missing. Have you seen him? He's missing." And I watched that person be shot, so I knew for a fact that person was unfortunately dead. I mean, why wouldn't you watch the video if you're trying to work out where people are? That's absolutely insane. But I mean, the thing, she made a remark about how she felt. Her words were I forget where I've written this down, but I've got it here somewhere. At the precipice. She feels often she's at the precipice, which implies sort of falling into something. It implies she has a severe problem with mental illness, with anxiety. Now, there are many things that people that suffer from anxiety and depression can be good at. One of them is the arts. Being highly anxious, I guess because you see the world in this unusual way, and you need to construct a sense of certainty, and you need to express how you feel, or you kind of go mad. And so it correlates with being good at the arts. But one thing there was, there was research by a guy called Post about 25 years ago, and he looked at the correlates of these conditions and being successful in a particular area. And one of the things that's quite rare for them to be good at, to be high in, is anxiety. It's depression, perhaps slightly different thing, but anxiety. She's open about this being high in anxiety. I'm trying to find the quote about. I'm sorry, I had it noted down here about the precipice. But anyway, so it's very interesting that someone who has this level of anxiety has got this far and is to the point of running a country. And it seems to me that everything, the period of fervour, the conversion, that correlates with mental instability, because there's all the evidence indicates that people that change their identity tends to be mentally unstable people that do that. People that leave religions that they're brought up in, that correlates with low mental stability. There was a relationship. There was a study called the relationship between fertility and distress. And it found that an inability to get pregnant is associated with anxiety. Not it causes anxiety, but also it's caused by anxiety. And I understand that Jacinda Ardern had problems getting pregnant, and they tried, and then eventually they had to use IVF or some kind of method. It didn't work.
Yeah, incidentally, they managed to get pregnant just before the election was announced. And she refused to tell the public about it because they did private polls saying the public wouldn't like it to have somebody who's pregnant running the country, because they'd think, maybe you should be taking time off to take care of your kid and that sort of stuff, and not be a prime minister. So it would have affected the vote. So they didn't tell anybody about that until after she got elected, of course.
Quite right too. They should. That's exactly what they should think. And people have been inculcated with this idea that to even think like that is sexist or whatever, But that's exactly what any sensible person would think. But so the fact you have problems getting pregnant is associated with anxiety. The fact that you can't say the name of this fellow, Brendan Tarrant, could be interpreted as a sign of obsessive compulsive disorder, which is associated with anxiety. I think she's underweight. She looks to me to be gaunt and sort of underweight, particularly considering that she's only relatively recently, in the last year and a half, had a child, which is consistent with anxiety. It would be amazing, really, if she wasn't suffering, if someone with a history of mental instability like that wasn't suffering from something like postnatal depression. I mean, it would be odd if she wasn't. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why perhaps you might expect people to be concerned about a woman who's just had a child being prime minister, because postnatal depression is very real. It's a very real and very unpleasant thing. And a person is in no condition to be able to be working, let alone running a important Western country with postnatal depression. And we are a wealthy Western country, whatever, a small Western country, but significant. And so I would be amazed if she didn't. In addition, I understand there was an article in the Guardian. It called something like it was called Jacinda Ardern, Having a Baby Changes the Tone a Bit, 10th of August 2018, in which she says she's breastfeeding. Now, lactation has certain effects on personality. There's good research into this. It makes females less suspicious, and it makes them higher on what's called socialization. And socialization is basically empathy. It makes you want to be cohesive. It makes you want to ensure that everyone gets on. It basically makes you more loving and kind. And this is and more empathetic. And this is great, of course, if you've got a baby, because that's the one thing you need to be. If the baby's crying, you've got to attend to it straight away. You can't be angry with it. Women that were angry in prehistory when their babies woke up in the middle of the night would have been selected out. And that's probably one of the reasons why there's this relationship. Breastfeeding makes women, as it were, more womanlike, more agreeable, more inclined to see these behaviour patterns which we've seen, which is this degree of empathy that's so strong that she's breaking down and crying and empathising with the Muslim community, despite the fact that we have seen what the equivalents of Tarrant, who are Muslim, have done in such places as Paris or whatever. Wearing the headscarf I found particularly fascinating, but it makes them less suspicious. It makes them more altruistic. And she is altruistic. I mean, she did, when she was in America, she worked in a New York soup kitchen, this kind of thing. And one of the things that I also wondered about was the way that she's kind of almost identified with Islam. She must be so conflicted. She's been brought up by this, this guy, what's his name? But he's a commissioner or something, relatively eminent father.
Ross Ardern, her father. He was a police officer for 40 years, and there was appointed the High Commissioner of Niue, which is a small Pacific island nation.
Okay, so and he's Mormon, and they often do have they often do reach high socioeconomic status, Mormons. But she there must be, from research I did when I did my doctorate, it was on fundamentalist Christianity, and then subsequent to that I've looked at Mormonism, and those that leave, the sense of conflict they feel is terrible, because they are desperate to be accepted by their community. By their community that they've been brought up in and they've been inculcated with and they love and whatever, but if they leave it, they're literally saying to these people that I'd rather go to hell than follow the rules of the community. I mean, it's a very, very significant thing to break with it. So she must be so conflicted in her mind. She must have, not only is she highly anxious, that's quite clear, but she has this, I would think, this problem, this unresolved issue. I mean, she's only 30, what is she, 38? 39?
She's not quite 40 yet, but, you never ask a woman her age, Ed.
I think I'm right in saying she was born in something like July 1980, so let's say she's 38. And so I would think that it's quite interesting that she then, she probably identifies Muslims as this oppressed community that she has to kind of mother. And you can see how she'd identify with them. I mean, she's been brought up in a countercultural, extremely religious, extremely conservative religion, which until relatively recently, until 1880 or something, was polygamous, and which is extremely patriarchal and controls women in all kinds of ways. And there she is, identifying with this highly conservative, highly patriarchal religion, which is polygamous.
Interestingly enough, just a side note on Mormonism, there was a claim that Mormonism had in fact swelled its ranks at a certain point throughout history to have a huge influx of new members. And it turns out that what had happened is a lot of Mormons had gone out to their family members' graves and written down their names on pieces of paper and then listed them as the church's new members and converted after death.
Oh yes, you can do that. Yes, you can convert. They all trace their family trees as far back as they can, because Joseph Smith was a great believer in. Joseph Smith's brother died, and it was very traumatic for him, and so therefore he developed a theology in which marriage is eternal, and that when you go to heaven, there's none of this divine light or whatever. I mean, it's basically a big family get together, and once you get there, you can get married again, and you can to spirit people, and you can have spirit children, and the whole thing carries on. So family is absolutely central to Mormonism. It's absolutely central to everything they do. So it's very useful if you're into genealogy and tracing your family tree, of course, because then you can go online. There's this website, and if people are into that. But yeah, so she's. I think that this is relevant, this conflict, and what you have. And also the other thing is that, well, there is some evidence that you shouldn't take antidepressants when you're breastfeeding. There's some evidence that certain antidepressants will cause problems for the child, though there is counter evidence to that. But if one was of a particularly anxious nature, and I know of cases of this, then women will often stop taking antidepressants while they're breastfeeding, and just because they're told they should breastfeed. It's terrible to not breastfeed these days. It's this very strong culture that you should breastfeed, which didn't used to be the case 50 years ago, and B, that they're so overly cautious that they don't want to risk anything, so they stop taking the antidepressants, even though there's evidence that there's only some antidepressants, like venlafaxine is one, which have been shown to have only a modest negative impact on the baby. So perhaps she's not taking antidepressants, but everything about it seems to me like a mental breakdown, which is consistent with what we know about her mental history, that she's on record as saying. And if she's been hospitalized, and there are obviously rumors to that effect, then this is a particularly severe case. But what it shows is that what's fascinating about it is the way that people's guard has been taken down. So due to political correctness and so on, under sort of normal Darwinian conditions, people will have certain instincts about what is and isn't correct, and what you should and shouldn't do. And those instincts will be consistent with what is evolutionarily useful. So people under Darwinian conditions will be evolved to think that you shouldn't do that. It's wrong. It's wrong to have sex with your sister, or it's there's something wrong with this, that, or the other. And then you get organizations which develop, which perpetuate, which render the will of God, or render just absolutely customary these ways of thinking, which make them promotable the more. So, for example, the attitude in, let's say, the Yanomamo of Venezuela, which is this tribe who are Stone Age, basically, and they're known as the fierce people. And they understand that it's no good for the tribe to have what they would see as just hangers-on, and what they would regard as just people that are going to drag them down. It's no good. And so if a baby shows the slightest signs of illness, they just kill it. And from an evolutionary, appalling as it is, brutal as it is, from an evolutionary perspective, that kind of makes sense. That's how they deal with it. And their theology, for want of a better word, says, well, look, this is what the ancestors always did. This is what the spirits have always done, and therefore we should do it. Now, we used to have the same thing. We used to have this way of thinking, which was mandated ultimately by religion and by the church, which said that men should do certain things and women should do certain things, that leadership particularly should be male, and particularly in times of crisis, it should be, and so on. And this has been gradually, it seems to me, undermined. And this whole system of thinking, we've been told we can't think like this. It's wrong to think like this, until you get a situation where not a masculinized woman, but a highly feminine woman is in charge of New Zealand, and is having a breakdown, and is influencing other people who don't even have whatever. I mean, she's anxious, highly anxious woman, unable to get pregnant easily. It implies to me almost maladaptiveness, mutation, perhaps even. But this is being imposed. This is influencing even the non-carriers, even the normal members of New Zealand society who are psychologically normal, are being influenced to. I saw images of female policemen wearing these veils. it's quite a sad thing to see. That side of, but you're living through it. I mean, tell me, haven't actually spoken to a New Zealander about it. What's the feeling on the ground about her?
Well, I've actually been to Christchurch and interviewed some of the one witness who was actually at the second mosque when the shooting happened. He managed to hide in the toilets and not get shot. A couple of other witnesses who happened to be nearby at the time, who rolled past and saw dead bodies on the street, and interviewed the president of the main mosque where the major shooting happened, and he always alternated his Friday prayers, and so his subordinate was leading the prayers that day. And when we interviewed him, he said that it might be a fortunate or unfortunate instance that happened. And it occurred to me that there's this old saying, is that sometimes the worst thing isn't that everybody else died. The worst thing is that you're alive to continue feeling that pain, right? And there's knee deep for a 2-minute walk, a brisk walk, flowers along the Hagley Park entrance. It's incredible, and you've never seen anything like it. Knee deep for, I don't know, a couple of 100 meters or something like that, filling up the sidewalk. And that's only at one site, because every single mosque around the entire country now has police with automatic weapons 24/7 and knee deep flowers that people have brought around it, that kind of thing. So this has affected the entire country massively. Now, when we were speaking to, I believe his name's Bashir Khan, he's the president of the mosque. I told him this analogy that when I was walking up Queen Street one time, central Auckland here, and came across this guy. And he'd just been robbed really badly, like he'd been giving out free clothing to people, that kind of thing. And some people came up and robbed all the free clothing off of him and took his money, his last $10 and his joint, you know. And I could see that in this kid's face that he was like starting to question humanity entirely. I had $10, I had a joint, and I gave it to him, and then restored his humanity. And same is true in this particular instance where you have such a horrific instance. And he said that the people had felt such a huge shock, but at the same time, that huge amount of love and support that really came in from not only the people of Christchurch and the Muslim community, but from the whole country and indeed the whole world. I spoke to people there that had travelled in from Germany and all sorts of other places to come and pay their respects. And he said it feels so much better that there is this kind of support because there's this unity and we're all together as one. And he said that, but no matter how many people come and give him hugs and all of that kind of stuff, it will probably never be enough to fully wax over that particular attack. So yeah, it's affected the country massively.
Yeah, I mean, from the way you describe it, it reminds me in some respects of when Princess Diana died in the UK, which happened when I was about 16, and you had, again, flowers all over the place. I mean, you couldn't any entrance to a park, anything that was civic. Any entrance to a town hall, there'd just be piles and piles of flowers, a shrine. Supermarkets set up condolence books for people to queue and sign, this kind of thing. But there's a difference which interests me. I don't deal. One of the reasons that I'm able, perhaps, to research the kind of controversial areas I do is that I guess I'm a bit kind of autistic, and I don't really deal with this emotion nonsense very well. And what's interesting about the difference is that Princess Diana was English. And it was England's rose and so on, and it was, it touched us in that way. That it was the leader of our tribe in some way, the princess of our tribe, our Helen of Troy, who was killed. Whereas what we're talking about here is foreigners who have come and lived in your country and who are of a different race to the vast majority of people in New Zealand and are genetically very different from them. And that's what I find very interesting. I've got a book coming out later this year called Race Differences and Ethnocentrism. And it seems to me that it's a testimony to this. I mean, we did studies on this and we found that we European peoples have very, very low levels of ethnocentrism, whether it's positive ethnocentrism, that is to say, seeing yourself as brilliant and wonderful and the best, or negative ethnocentrism, that is to say, seeing others as evil and bad. And this has been a good thing, as maybe I mentioned on your last show, I can't remember, but this has been a good thing in evolutionary terms because it's allowed us to trade. And it's allowed us to trade, and it's allowed our gene pool to get bigger. And because our gene pool has got bigger, we have thrown up outliers by genetic chance, geniuses, people that are outlier high IQ with a certain kind of personality. And those people come up with brilliant ideas, things that allow you to win battles, things that allow you to expand further. And this is what allowed Europeans, and particularly groups like the English and the French and the Germans, to basically dominate the world. And if you combine that strategy with having high intelligence, which we do have relative to most people. I don't know if it's legal to say that in New Zealand, but I have a book coming out in Australia soon, and that had to be censored from it. But we do have high IQ compared to a lot of other peoples. And if you combine that and with an optimum level of ethnocentrism, so that ethnocentrism often upheld by religion, by religiousness, so that ethnocentrism doesn't drop too low. The religiousness telling you that you're the best and whatever because you're chosen by God, but that tends to parallel your race because religiousness tends to be sort of passed down in families. Then you're all right. You have other groups like the Finns, who I've done a book about recently called The Silent Rape Epidemic, How the Finns Were Groomed to Love Their Abusers. And they are a bit different because they have a small gene pool, very small gene pool, because they evolved this terribly, terribly harsh ecology. So if you deviate in any way from the optimum to the ecology, then you'll just die. And so they can't afford to have a large gene pool. It's impossible. They can't afford to have geniuses. They can't do that. That strategy doesn't work for them. If their gene pool expands, then they just die. It's no good. So the only way they can win in the battle of group selection is by being highly ethnocentric, by thinking they're great and they're brilliant, and opposing outsiders and being prepared to make tremendous sacrifices for that reason. And that can sometimes allow them to win in a battle against a group which is got more geniuses and more power and more ideas and more innovations, but less ethnocentrism. And a good example of this is World War II. If you think about what the Japanese were like when they invaded, let's say, Singapore in, was it 1941 or 42? I can't remember. But when they invaded Singapore, and the British just couldn't believe what they were up against. The British, with better technology, with more geniuses per capita, with a larger gene pool, with much better technology, were up against a people who were so fantastically brave, who were prepared to take such incredible risks, who were prepared to just die. They couldn't believe it, and they were just overwhelmed by them. They were incredibly high in positive ethnocentrism in laying down their lives for their community, and of course, the flip side, unbelievably high in negative ethnocentrism. I mean, some of the things that Tojo did to the Chinese. You had 20,000 people, women in Manchuria, who were raped and then gang raped and then bayoneted. I mean, they put into the shadows anything the Nazis did. I mean, it really was unbelievably appalling.
One of the worst tactics I heard of was the usage of Compound 1080, which is now being used to dump into New Zealand rivers and bushes and things like that, which they use to poison the water supplies in Manchuria. Just kill a whole bunch of people downstream, that kind of thing. They'd just drink it and they'd shake for maybe up to 48 hours in some cases. Just horrific deaths. Really, really inhumane.
Yeah. And they were prepared to do. The Tojo was focused. He wanted to work out the most efficient way of killing more Chinese people. Most of what we know about frostbite and how frostbite spreads and how frostbite works is due to experiments that were conducted by Tojo's forces in that period. I mean, it's incredible. It just boggles the mind. But that is an example of a highly ethnocentric strategy because they have a small gene pool, because they ultimately evolved to a more northerly environment than that in which they live now, and so they couldn't have this genius strategy. And what is happening in New Zealand, that you can have that level of empathy for people who aren't part of your. I mean, if we think about you as the centre of your world, and then your family, you love your family more than you love your extended family. You love your extended family more than you love your kinship group, and you love your kinship group more than you love your people. And there are things that interfere with that. I mean, you might love your dog more than you love your cousin or something like that. But in general, that's how it works. And with ethnocentric societies, they will have a great deal of empathy for their people being killed, and that's why 9/11 was such a big thing, because if that had happened somewhere in Africa, nobody would really care. But if it happened in America, where European people live, and so that made it a terrible and newsworthy tragedy. And so what's very interesting...
And that's another thing to note as well, is not long after this shooting here in New Zealand, where 49 people lost their lives, there was a shooting in Kenya where 147 Christian students lost their lives. So that was in Kenya, I think. That was reported in the Telegraph or the Mail or something like that. But of course, nowhere near the kind of coverage that this shooting has. Now, what the reason for that is, I don't know. But the point here is, ladies and gentlemen, that horrific things are happening all over the world all the time. And sometimes our focus is put in one particular way. And speaking of focus, I've been losing mine during this. I'm so tired, ladies and gentlemen, and my neck is incredibly sore. I'm going to go see a chiropractor this evening. I have to do the bat turn. When in Batman 1989, whenever he hears something, he has to turn his entire body in order to see whatever the hell it is. That's what I have to do right now. My neck is so stiff. But I just wanted to first acknowledge the super chats that have actually come in so far today. I'm sorry I've been putting off getting into them. From Cybercamp, he asks, any more vids in the can from Christchurch? Good job, mate. And yes, there are actually some videos coming out from Christchurch. Indeed, I'm going to be working on a new green screen background from all the footage that I shot down there. And the downtown area with all the earthquake damage and all the murals and stuff like that have gone out. There's just so much footage. It's crazy. In fact, I was working on it from about maybe 3:30 this morning, working on my interview with Bashir Khan from the mosque himself, the president. So that was going to be uploaded soon. And he also asks, what other groups are interested in bloodlines? I think that's a message for you, Ed. What other churches and things of that nature are very interested in their bloodlines and tracing them back?
Well, you have, if we talk about religion in general, then of course it's Hinduism, because the whole of Hinduism is centered around the caste system, whereby you divide the belief is that you've got 4 castes. And then you've got the outcasts, the Dalit, and then within each of those castes, there's hundreds of subcastes, and ultimately it's all about ancestry and what your ancestor hundreds or thousands even of years ago did for a living. All of the surnames mean the name of a job of some kind normally. So anything that's got Raj in it tends to imply that you're descended from some sort of prince. So bloodlines is absolutely central to it, and you're only supposed to marry people who are from a similar subcaste from you, and this goes all the way up. And there's certain variations. You're allowed to marry someone from a different caste in sort of times of crisis, but in general, a man, you can't. You're not supposed to marry between the Varnas, i.e., the 4 big castes. That's kind of verboten. Except it's allowed at certain points. It's allowed when a man sometimes can marry, a woman can marry up. So a woman can marry occasionally a man from a higher caste, but a man cannot marry, but it can't work the other way around. A woman cannot marry a man from a lower caste. And so what this means at the very top of the Brahmins is that you get polygamy. You get men with multiple wives at the top. And then at the bottom, you get the lowest caste, the servant caste, and those men who are of low status just can't marry at all, because of course they can't marry untouchables. So Hinduism is completely centered around blood. It's very heavily centered around bloodlines. You could argue that all forms of paganism, that's kind of true. It's all based. You are a member of a pagan group. Shinto would be another example, because you're in Japan, because you're born into it. You don't convert into it. You're born into it. Another issue, of course, is Muslim cousin marriage, and this is a combination of Islam and I guess certain pre-Islamic ideas. But in Somalia, for example, when 2 Somalis meet, they will tend to list off their ancestors back to about the 16th century, and if they haven't got an ancestor in common, they're not in the same clan, then they can't have much to do with each other. And if they've been in warring, if they're from 2 clans that hate each other, then they'll hate each other. and you get problems in refugee centres when people try to put Somalis together and they're from warring clans, so they know their ancestry. It's surprising. I mean, how many people from New Zealand, British ancestry people, whatever from New Zealand, can tell you their ancestors back to the 16th century?
Well, in New Zealand, the way that you prove your culture and your loyalty and your entire ancestry is, do you have a dozen beers to bring to the party?
That's it. That's then you're a New Zealander. You're a Kiwi.
Yeah.
You've done it.
Have you got beer? Okay, you're in.
So is New Zealand? I mean, is there this sense of, like, I guess in Finland you have this sense of? I did this video. I plugged my own YouTube channel, The Jolly Heretic. I did this video called "The Rape of the Finns," where I looked at one of the issues with the Finns is they don't have much open social class. It's not overt. And it's a bit of a problem, really, because in England we talk about social class a lot, and we say, oh, how can we get more people from working class backgrounds, into good universities? It's an issue, and it is an issue. It's a significant issue. If you're clever by genetic chance or whatever, and you're born to working class parents, you may well not achieve your attention or be held back because of the low stimulation environment they create for you. And it's often the case that when very clever people are born into low status backgrounds, they only bear fruit, as it were. They only flourish relatively late in life, once they're creating their own environment consistent with their own IQ, rather than the one created by their parents or the rubbish school that they go to. And this is a problem in Finland because they don't talk about this. No one discusses this. It's not considered an issue. Is that the case in New Zealand? People discuss class. Do you have private schools?
Only really the people who work for unions and stuff discuss class. Everybody else, nah.
Do you have private schools?
Oh yeah. And there's an underground thing that nobody really talks about, but everybody knows about, called the Old Boys School Tie Network. It's called here. Sort of like the black nobility. The Europeans call it.
Right. And so do people from like top New Zealand families, do they go to university in New Zealand, or do they go to Oxford or something?
Well, sometimes they'll either go to university here or overseas, but they will almost always, especially if they're globalists, wind up getting their first or second job overseas and get overseas experience, and then come home and take powerful positions in the government at home after they've had the right ideas of globalism implanted into them over a period of time.
It sounds very like Finland. It sounds very like Finland in that way. Often the ruling class here often spends some time abroad when they're young at a foreign university or something. But again, it's not an issue that's discussed.
Yeah, it's to weaken your national identity and your national sovereignty. So when I got busted for selling weed when I was much younger, I've now got a travel ban, so I can't leave the islands at all. I'm stuck here permanently. So essentially, I think what that maybe has done is made me a bit more centric in my ideas of like how important my country is, because there's no escape for me. I can't go anywhere else.
About for life.
Yeah. Pretty much. No government, as far as I know, will let in a drug dealer. Most governments will let in somebody who's got like something for personal supply, but somebody's got an indictable charge for possession of cannabis for sale? No, don't think so. And especially not the United States and Japan, even personal use over there. No, never. No negotiations, no nothing.
So you couldn't even go to Australia?
Theoretically not. I mean, Max Egan has told me to go and get my passport and all of that sort of stuff and go to the embassy and find out. But my neck started hurting. This Christchurch thing is happening. I had to fly down to Christchurch and do all of this kind of thing. So I haven't gotten around to it just yet. But hopefully once my neck's feeling better and I'll actually feel up to it, then I might go. But what's problematic is, and I might have to consult with a lawyer on this, the reason Max wants me to go over there is so that I can watch the video. So I want to know from the New Zealand police or a lawyer or something like that, if I break a New Zealand law, even though I'm a New Zealander in another country, is that still illegal? Or are we living in a new world order of legal fallacies now, where any law you break anywhere can be counted against you?
It is preposterous if it's illegal to watch that video or read the manifesto if it's online. That's absolutely extraordinary. But the bloodline issue is it's a very salient question. Because these people are over, it's entirely understandable to have sympathy, empathy even, towards this appalling thing they've been through. And as a person who watched the video, it really is bizarrely sickening. I mean, it's set up like if you played the worst thing about it is that it's like watching someone play the computer. It's like playing the computer game Doom. he's got the camera positioned in such a way that it's the gun in the center of the screen, like in Doom. Remember?
Yeah, well, you'd be more thinking about Call of Duty would be a more appropriate reference, because what's interesting, though, is that Steam, which retail online video games that you can download, that kind of thing, big titles, were having a sale on Call of Duty 4 just after this incident, and I thought that's maybe a little bit insensitive. But then again, when is there not having a shooting happen somewhere?
Well, no, but what it was, he's got this, and so it kind of makes it weird, kind of unworldly, really, that it's positioned like that.
That was also the confusion of it, is that it was so many people, even the victims and family members and things like that I talked to, they're all kind of going, it was so much like a video game. Even running out to empty a clip and then running back into cover in the hallway and that kind of thing, just like it was Crisis 2 or something, crazy sort of stuff. And the last element I just wanted to talk about on the video is that a lot of people, including myself, were shocked, not by the video, but by their lack of emotion in watching the video. You're watching innocent people being slaughtered, exterminated, and a lot of us have felt nothing, and that made me feel something. I was like, whoa, there's something wrong with this. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to go down to Christchurch, is because I wanted to feel that pain, I wanted to feel that grief, and I wanted to feel it for real. I didn't want to be like just a passive observer.
I would say two things about it. One is that there is a point in it where he's going to reload or something. He's jogging along, and there's this poor young girl, I don't know, early 20s or mid 20s, I suppose, who's obviously seriously injured, and she's managed to crawl out of the mosque into the street. And she's just going, oh, help, help. And he jogs past her and then turns and stops and blows her brains out. And it's, just absolutely appalling. But the thing is that the situation, I mean, there was a study by a guy called Tatu Vanhanen called Ethnic Conflict. And he found that 66% of the variation worldwide in the level of and intensity of ethnic conflict is simply based around ethnic diversity. And the more genetically diverse two groups are, the higher that level of conflict will tend to be. And of course, something like religion can elevate the conflict as well, because it marks people out as, even if they're not genetically that different. Like, for example, most people that were involved that were killed in that shooting were Pakistani or Arab or whatever. And those people are Caucasian, just as we are Caucasian. It's one large, they're related. It's one large racial group, but they mark themselves out as different with these, with the hijab and so on. And so this elevates this sense of difference and of conflict. And so what you'd expect to happen if two groups were in conflict like that ultimately would be war. And failing war, you would expect the more, the term we use often is group selected. So those that have a very strong sense of doing something, of wanting to pass on. You can pass on your genes directly by having kids. You can pass them on by investing in your uncles and nieces and nephews and so on. And you can pass them on like a soldier does by investing in the group. And a group that is successful in evolutionary terms will tend to have an optimum percentage of these group-selected people who don't perhaps pass on their genes directly, but help the group in some way, like a shaman in a tribe. Often they don't have children, but they elevate the tribe's sense of its own importance and the tribe's sense of its own sort of divinity and healing rituals and all this kind of thing. And so they're indirectly helping the group by that form of behavior. So they're operating at the group level. And you'll get these people that operate, and they'll often be sort of strange people, unusual people. Geniuses are a bit like that. Antisocial people. Sort of psychopaths to some extent. Except that they also have a very strong sense of the good of their kinship group, of their ethne, and you'll get that on both sides. Whether it's Islamic suicide bombers, and they'll often be young single men, because at that age in general personality traits. As you get older, you get stronger and stronger in conscientiousness, i.e., impulse control, agreeableness, i.e., altruism, and then at a certain age, in sort of early 20s, there's this dip where you get lower in these things. And people are often quite creative at that age, because one of the things that seems to predict creativity is elements of psychopathology. And there's a study, again, I referenced it earlier, by a guy called Post in 1994 in the British Journal of Psychology, I think it was. And he looked at this and he found that all of these eminent writers, eminent politicians, eminent artists are all subclinically psychopathic. So for example, I think I've noted down the data. If 1% of the population has narcissism, it's 28% of politicians, 27% of artists. For example, and with psychopathology, it was similar figures. 16% of men are psychopaths compared to 50% of artists, eminent artists. So this psychopathology will raise creativity, and it could be that dip is selected for that reason, but also because of it. It makes you more likely to basically be a soldier, to do things for the group, to kill for the group, and it's exactly that kind of age where in under Darwinian conditions you'd expect people to be fighting for the group, and so you'd want their psychopathology to be elevated, and they'd want to show their manliness to the females by going off and fighting. And all this kind of thing. So you'd expect these people. How old was he? He cannot be named. How old was Voldemort?
I believe he was in his early 20s.
Early 20s. That's exactly the kind of age that you'd expect this.
Now, interestingly enough, I saw a comic one time, and it depicted a terrorist suicide bomber training camp. And the instructor was there wearing a vest with a detonator, and he goes, "Okay, students, pay close attention. I'm only going to do this once."
Yes, but that's what you'd expect. You'd expect more and more of this. You'd expect more and more in the case of Islamism, because there's this highly organized religious subculture that's related to it. It will be more organized. But in the case of, I suppose, what we call it, white nationalism or something like that, you would expect these lone wolves. And as people become more and more kind of aware, or more, they feel more and more under threat. As the ethnic diversity increases, as the degree of the percentage of the white population decreases, you would predict more and more and more of this. So people can lay flowers 3 feet deep as much as they like. I suspect they're going to find themselves doing so more. Not necessarily in New Zealand, but in other countries, because there's always this group selected, and they will always be these oddballs. That's what they'll always be. Because if a society was full of group-selected people, nobody would have children. I mean, it's always going to be people on the fringes, the people that would have become shamans, or, who would have just laid down their lives or whatever for the group in previous times. It's these kinds of people. Did he try to kill himself, by the way? Did he try to kill himself?
No, he tried to escape the scene in his car, but he got T-boned by cops. And I think he was so shaken that the cops actually ripped him through his own car window and threw him around on the ground, and then arrested him. Within 30 minutes of the attack. And interestingly enough, there was an armed defenders squad, the New Zealand SWAT team drill, that entire week. And on the day, there was a Special Air Services, our Special Forces, sniper drill, where they had international snipers, including from the Chinese military, which the police gave them authorization to shoot to kill. So you had foreign military on New Zealand soil with shoot-to-kill orders, walk in the streets during a drill when the exact instance that was depicted in the drill occurred in real time. At the same time that this was just before a massive internet outage, so that nobody had any social media until this. Just before that, New Zealand was visited by John Podesta, famous from the Pizzagate emails, aka Podesta the Molester, to warn New Zealand of a massive cyber attack, which of course subsequently came. And just before that, on the 6th of March, less than 2 weeks before the attack, the Crisis X conference was happening in New Zealand. What's Crisis X? Well, first of all, you had to pay $2,000 in order to go to the conference. Second of all, it had 120 terrorism and terrorism responsiveness and cybersecurity experts and security analysts and that kind of thing. 120 delegates at that conference. This occurred on March the 6th. And what does Crisis X, the company, do for a living? Well, it actually turns out that they're involved with terrorism preparedness and drills for police. So what they do is they employ things like dummies that have blood packs and people who've got, say, for example, amputees and all of these other kind of things, and they stage and reenact realistic-looking things for training purposes for police personnel. Now, that's all in the lead-up to this kind of thing. And directly after this, we have the police visit, people like me as much as 4 times in 4 days for talking about these types of things. I have had my main YouTube channel restricted. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening live and you're not subscribed to this channel, please do, because this is the backup channel with 1/10 of the subscribers. And they have ripped down pretty much anybody who's talking about the video. They have, I believe, one listener I was talking to said he got visited by 2 o'clock in the morning by police to seize his firearms. Apparently people are being visited all over New Zealand at all hours of the day and night to seize firearms, to ask questions and all of these kind of things. And so far, not really one of these people has come forward that had any connection with the assailant or his related ideologies, or in any way, in some cases, one guy hadn't even voted before. And the police are coming around accusing him of being a far-right extremist and taking his weapons and that kind of thing. So it's gone crazy real quickly on the aggregate level, whereas at the heart level, on the ground, you have the what you would expect from New Zealanders. Heart-based consciousness. People really care. People showed up in droves, and they showed a lot of love, right? But on the government level, on the police level, on the censorship level, on the world government level, we're talking about a lot of things that are frighteningly fast in their execution.
And I would like to bring this back to Jacinda Ardern. I mean, and my original point, which is that if we should conceive of a society as a kind of super organism, and under conditions of and with each individual, like a beehive. My colleague Michael Woodley of Vinny has given this metaphor, a beehive. And there's a
guess what the New Zealand Parliament building is called?
I've no idea.
The beehive. All right, it was designed by one of our Freemason prime ministers. Go ahead.
Well, was it built in the mid to late 19th century?
That's right.
Yeah, the Victorians were very interested in this beehive concept.
20th century, 20th century, mid to late 20th.
Okay. Like a late 20th. Oh, it's new, is it? Like a beehive. But anyway, so each you have to have the under a beehive that is under conditions of Darwinian selection. Then you will have the optimum level of every caste. Okay, and that beehive will be able to successfully compete against other beehives in order to win what is essentially a battle of group selection between different hives of bees competing for resources. Now, if there's something wrong, if there's, let's say, the equivalent of a bee with depression or anxiety, let's say one of the feeder castes, the feeder caste that feeds the different bees, the different baby bees, the different amounts of food and so on, in order to ensure that some become queens and some become drones and some become workers and so on, right? If something goes wrong with that feeder, if you have a mutant feeder, then of course it will mess up everything. Everybody that mutant feeder comes into contact with will potentially be messed up, and you'll have a suboptimal hive with too many queens and not enough workers and so on, right? And it will be less able to survive. And it's like that with us since the Industrial Revolution. No longer under conditions of Darwinian selection. You get used to be 40% child mortality, and now it's down to 1%. And those people that survived under conditions of Darwinian selection would have low levels of mutant genes. They'd have very few mutant genes, because mutant genes are almost always bad when you're evolved to an ecology. And so and mutant genes of the mind, which is about 88% of the genome, correlate with mutant genes of the body, because of course the mind as a target for mutation is so large. And this is why people that have, let's say, autism, it correlates with the minor physical abnormalities. You know, people who are paedophiles tend to have minor physical abnormalities. People who have something wrong with the mind tend to have things wrong with the body. And this is why things like anxiety and depression indeed will correlate with other things, with other problems, physical problems, things like Crohn's disease or whatever. They go together. And so you have a situation in a small society where some mutant, let's say, who has some problem with his mind that makes him want to kill himself and makes him nihilistic, and he will come into contact with other people, and those people are evolved to only come into contact with genetically normal people. Once they come into contact with these mutants, then their genes will be expressed suboptimally, and so therefore this weird idea that the mutant has can spread to people he knows. That's why if you live with somebody who's deeply mentally unstable, it will affect you. It will affect you in a negative way, just to be with someone like that, right? Now, you're in a situation in New Zealand where someone like that, someone who will affect who will cause people's genes to be expressed suboptimally in terms of things like ethnocentrism or whatever, is in charge of the country, and the reach that person can have is enormous. And under normal conditions, of course, under conditions where there are these gender roles and where people are more questioning and where people are prepared to talk about mental illness and say, well, perhaps mental illness is not a particularly good idea, and people in power, good in artists maybe, but not in power. Under normal conditions where you can talk about that, this would never have happened. But under conditions where you can't talk about that, which has been caused by these ideologies like political correctness, which themselves can ultimately be seen as expressions of these spiteful mutations that manifest, right? That would have been selected out under Darwinian conditions because they've correlated with physical mutations and the people wouldn't have grown up and had children. But now, of course, they do. So you get this mutational load. And so this has meant that you can't talk about this. You can't question this. You can't say, look, you said in an interview before when you were Deputy Prime Minister that you're not mentally stable enough to be Prime Minister, so should you be Prime Minister? You can't say, look, you've just had a baby, is this really a good idea? You can't. And so therefore you end up with this hysterical woman in charge of the country.
Dear God, I'm going to lose my backup channel now too. Keep going ahead. This is awesome.
This hysterical woman, this mental, this mutant in charge of the country who induces her own insanity, really, her own hysteria in a whole nation. And thus people, the kind of crap that's happened to you has happened. It is very dangerous to have Jacinda Ardern or anyone like her in she should be running a cake store, not a country. She's not. She's a dangerous person to be in that position, and I think it's something that the New Zealanders should think seriously about.
Yeah, I'm
sorry. If
we knew this before. No. It's. I'll be sorry if the channel gets pulled, but hopefully we haven't mentioned the two words that begin with F. That rhyme with horse rag yet, and so therefore we might not get pulled. But it's illegal to question the narrative. Like if I read out the Facebook, the YouTube guidelines, these kind of things were very, very scary. They were sent to me. A whole bunch of my videos have been restricted. I've had to delete the vast majority of my content that involves anybody even questioning the official story on my channel. Just the ones that I've actually just given the backed up facts and stuff like that, they've remained on the channel. They haven't been flagged, that kind of thing. But anything actually like overtly saying no, it's not how it happened, that kind of thing, those have all been flagged, pulled, resulted in strikes on my channel, that kind of thing. And
I'm not questioning how it happened. I haven't read into any of the conspiracy theories, and I would note that if you look at the research by people like Pascal Boyer, his book Religion Explained, in times of stress and crisis, we are prone to religiousness. We are prone to be more likely to believe in God, but we're also prone to conspiracy theories. We're also prone to not accepting. But we're prone if you show people a load of dots, they will tend to random dots. They'll tend to see a pattern. We're prone to. We're evolved to over-detect patterns, to over-detect agency, and because in a forest or something, if you hear a sound, well, it could be a wolf, or it could just be some twigs or something breaking in. It could be the wind. If you think it's the wind, and you think it's the wind and you're right, fine. But if you think it's the wind and you're wrong, you've lost nothing, and you potentially avoid being killed.
I do have I did make a post about this last night. I'd like to just quickly read it out if I can. There was an attack. Global media coverage. 49 dead. There's a massive public outpouring of genuine support for the victims. The video is censored across multiple platforms, multiple internet service providers and countries simultaneously, including many videos and channels that question the official story. The mosque and masjid where the attacks took place have had complete renovations within 2 weeks of the attacks, including fully repaired walls, windows, paint, carpet underlay, and are currently open to the public. Police are confiscating guns across New Zealand. In some cases, they are coming to people's homes in the middle of the night. Police are also, in some cases, repeatedly visiting people throughout New Zealand, again, sometimes in the middle of the night, who've committed no crimes, have no connection to the perpetrators, have never been connected with any related ideology, and in one case, have never even voted before, all without no real explanation. Meanwhile, with no real public discourse allowed, the media and government continue to wonder not only why people are starting to share and believe objectively and provably untrue claims about the attack, but also why people do not trust government or mainstream media to deliver the truth or treat the public like adults.
So what are these untrue claims about the attack then that are being promoted?
That this was by Kurt Richard Haskell and Jim Fetzer, respectively, have released articles to the effect that the entire shooting was a fake, nobody died, and the video itself was a complete hoax set up with CGI and crisis actors. Which myself and Max Egan, I've disproven that people have died by going down there and actually visiting, talking to the witnesses, and Max Egan's gone over this video frame by frame, approximately 37,000 frames if I recall correctly, one by one, and he's confirmed that the video is real, and I've confirmed that people have died. So these are objectively disprovable claims that these gentlemen have made, and perhaps should be issuing a retraction or something like that. I don't know, but I rendered no judgment because in early days of any crisis, speculations are abound, particularly if it's illegal to look at the evidence firsthand.
Well, yes. I mean, you're asking for it really. If you ban looking at the evidence or you ban talking about it, it's almost it's a signal for people to start who are critical minded.
Well, indeed, there's a term for it. It's called the Streisand effect. Story goes that Barbara Streisand had a helicopter over her place that took some photos, and it was published in a magazine. She then sued the magazine to remove the photos, and it generated so much interest that the next day she had 5 helicopters above her place taking pictures of it. So that Streisand effect, ladies and gentlemen, whatever you tell people and viciously go after them trying to hide, that's what people will be incredibly interested in. And I thought for myself, what a brilliant way to get people to watch the video. This is the best free marketing strategy I've ever heard of. You want to watch this video? It's illegal. You go for 10 years for jail for watching it. Oh my God, that'll generate so much interest. Everybody will want to watch it.
Well, yes. If you tell people, I mean, it was on Twitter the day that it happened, and people were saying, "Oh, for God's sake, you don't watch this, don't watch this." So, needless to say, of course, people did. But no, we can't stress. It's obviously, it's appalling what's happened to these people. Also, one thing that's noteworthy about it is that the people that he has attacks in attacking Muslims are people who it could be argued are quite group selected. I mean, they're the kind of people that would have survived under Darwinian conditions. They have this religion. This religion promotes fertility. They have very high fertility, in part because it's Allah's will to have high fertility, and they genuinely believe in Allah, and they believe their lives have meaning, and they believe their lives have eternal importance, and that is why they are the people that are going to inherit the earth. Because they believe those things. And Europeans used to believe those things. And that's why they expanded around the world. And now Europeans don't believe those things. And that's why they are contracting and being expanded into. I mean, it was, what was his name? Saeed Qutb. I can't pronounce the surname. Qutb. and he was the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He was executed by the Egyptian regime in the early 60s. And he went to America, and he just couldn't believe it. He just said, this is just like a cesspool of nobody believed in anything. And you know, what they need is something to give them meaning, and something to give them a sense of their own eternal, and that should be Islam. And that was at a time in the 60s, of course, when America was relatively religious compared to what it is now. And America now is relatively religious compared to somewhere like New Zealand or Western Europe. So I think what Qutb would have thought of that. So there's a sort of irony to it, really. That I don't know what he believes in. I don't know what motivated he who shall, Mr. Tarrant. Was it Tarrant?
What's problematic is that you have a look at who his claimed idols were. Anders Breivik, who was a Freemason who allegedly murdered 95 people. What was that? Was that in Finland or some Scandinavian country? I forget which. But
Norway.
In Norway, yeah. And there's also the Charlie Hebdo shooting and the what was it? The naval base shooting in Washington some time ago, and those kind of things. So the writing on the assailant's weapon, they were all white writing on a black weapon. They were actually the names and places of these shooters and where they shot them. You know, that kind of thing. So trying to idealize those kind of people. But what's problematic is many people have picked apart a lot of these shootings, and just like this one, you know, there's drills on the day, and there's crisis actor companies having conferences very close to the time, and all of these other kind of things, and they all follow a very, very similar pattern, and it's given rise to some belief that there is government-sponsored terrorism. And what it does is, this is an old Roman tactic, is you would frighten a population, and in their fear you could pass a whole bunch of very draconian legislation that ordinarily people would never accept, or they'd have their cognitive function fully aware and they would reject if they were not in such a state of fear. And it's believed that the Western governments and intelligence agencies may be involved worldwide, speculatively, in a whole lot of shootings using what they call mind-controlled subjects of the MK Ultra branch, which was exposed in the 70s, which are approximately 28,000 documents.
So sort of Reichstag fire sort of setup.
Operation Gladio, you familiar?
No,
which is basically Reichstag fire, but you have a template for it, and you can do it anywhere you want. Destabilize, assassinate, let off a bomb, and at election times, at holidays, and things like that. So it's essentially a political playbook of terrorism. And what Gladio was a program designed by the NATO countries, I think, to pull off these kind of attacks in order to destabilize their enemies in the region. And supposedly many of these types of attacks that we're now seeing and that I've just previously described usually only happen in NATO countries. And New Zealand was signed up to NATO in 2016, and now we've had one of these attacks. So these are all coincidences, but they have happened, and it's backed up. So the thing is,
I think I prefer my theory. I think that to be honest, I think that the theory that you're suggesting relies on a massive network of people who are extremely intelligent, you know, super clever, basically, to be able to pull this off.
Who are well-funded and ruthless.
Yes, but to be well-funded and to be able to negotiate that kind of funding, you'd also have to be clever. And those people are somehow fundamentally, in a very, you kind of differentiate them from the normal population. I don't agree with that. I think that there's a degree to which a population often will get the government it deserves. A government, if you have a population that's a bunch of liars and corrupt and so on, that's what the government's going to be like.
You're absolutely correct, and that's actually what my status last night was about. I'll read it out in a second, but continue.
I think it's quite important. I mean, okay, they're going to be the cream that will rise to the top to a certain extent. The people that are going to end up in politics are going to be highly intelligent relative to the population. They're going to have high, what we call general factor of personality. That is, good at getting on with people, good extroversion and high conscientiousness, and good at empathy and getting on with in life and so on. And some of those people will be high functioning psychopaths. Those people will often go very high, like to the top. But I think it's unlikely that these kinds of massive mega conspiracies wouldn't leak and wouldn't therefore fall apart. What I think is more likely is that you have a situation where something like this happens, and certain people can see the benefits of it in terms of doing what they want to do, and also that it's rendered worse perhaps if hysteria can be engendered in the population. And then once you do that, once you engender hysteria in the population, then they're looking for certainty and they're looking for someone to take charge, and then you can start to do whatever you like. And that's what I think's happened in New Zealand. And I think that it is particularly acute because if your prime minister was the guy, what's his name? This chap that's her coalition partner, conservative guy,
Winston Peters.
Right. Okay. That is a more sort of sensible character. Then perhaps things would be very different. But instead, as I said, you have this lactating manic depressive as the prime ministeress, and you have the problems of that induces, and in particular her strong level of empathy, and that empathy is then transposed onto those whom she sees as excluded, as the babies of New Zealand, if you like. And there's of course the Muslims and the other supposedly excluded people. I think my theory involves fewer assumptions about all these people working together.
I'm not making assumptions. I'm basing this off of
almost robotically clever.
Yeah, well. Do you believe that conspiracies happen? That's kind of like one of the things that they asked.
There's no doubt that they happen. There's no doubt that, of course, they happen, and that's one of the things.
This is early days, and I'll just take this down a notch because there's a completely different way of looking at this rather than the lens of conspiracy, which is what a lot of my colleagues do, and I'm just like, no, bro, you don't fucking understand. All right, so somebody asked me on a Facebook chat the other day, what's my solution to all of this? And I said, well, before I give you a solution, you must fully understand the entire problem and every single in, out, and what have you before you'd even understand the solution. And I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you are familiar with the entire holographic fractal nature of a universal collective consciousness co-creating and experiencing itself subjectively. So, with that in mind, here's my solution. Taking on as much personal responsibility as I can, being honest while acting by the dictates of a moral conscience, i.e. doing no harm, at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a society where everybody followed those two basic rules. How often would horrific incidents like this happen? How long would the hatred be able to foment before it is stopped and kind of go, no, that's not the way we do things here, that sort of thing. The aggregate morality of a society will reflect the aggregate freedom and freedom of thought thereof of that society, as would the aggregate immorality reflect the tyranny within that society.
But you're looking at societies in isolation.
Oh, no, I'm talking about...
Societies don't work in isolation. Societies have to have contact with other societies.
That's absolutely
and then other issues such as ethnocentrism and brutality towards outsiders being a factor in that, and are raised. And according to computer models, it's the societies that are most internally cooperative and externally hostile, all else controlled for, who tend to survive. So that's
precisely.
That kind of society that always follows the golden rule, always, 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 would be destroyed by another society which didn't.
Yeah, you're precisely correct, and it's that hostility to outsiders, as you say, that actually has that sort of thing. This concept of nationalism, national pride, a national culture that's distinctive from other people's, and an unwillingness to adopt other people's or accept other people's culture within your own. But yet, New Zealanders are very, very different to that, and indeed, we're a very, very highly travelled people. Like, even though I've been restricted from travelling for nearly a decade, I've still been to Vanuatu and Tahiti and Los Angeles and Australia Australia and that kind of thing. So we're very highly travelled people, and we've experienced a lot of other people's cultures, us ourselves, part of a colonial culture that's mixed with an indigenous culture, that kind of thing. So it's a very interesting perspective on the world that we have here, which is probably why we've got so many globalists in our parliament, like, for example, Jacinda, her mentor, Phil Goff, who's now the current mayor of Auckland, is a member of Parliamentarians for Global Action. Now, that's a globalist group with the stated goal of ending national sovereignty and putting state and national assets of strategic value into private hands. The former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who's now currently at the United Nations Development Programme and campaigning to be the next Secretary General, belongs to the Club de Madrid, which is stated goal is to end national sovereignty and put national assets and strategic assets into private hands. So, and these are the two mentors of our current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, whom herself, as we've said before, is a Mormon. Her father is a long-serving police officer, commissioner to an island nation. She was given a Freemason scholarship to go to Waikato University, and then her first job was actually working for Tony Blair for the Better Business Bureau in the UK, where their job was to cut red tape for major businesses and to strangle smaller businesses with red tape. Now, just after that, she then joined a PR firm in London during a time where there was a massive sex abuse scandal, big scandal in London, where a Freemason ring of pedophiles was involved among the top echelons of the police. Now, this later resulted in a ban of Freemasons joining the police. However, the City of London, under the Lord Mayor, which is not part of England, legally speaking, openly flouted this law. Now, after she helped to do that, she then came back, was recruited by these globalists that I just mentioned to you before in the Labour Party. She then shot up the party list in a what would be considered record time out of nowhere. Then, just before the most recent election, staged a coup against the now Justice Minister underneath her, Andrew Little, who was previously the party leader, and then got elected. And now you know where she came from, how she got here.
Well, yes, it certainly struck me that her background is, she's not some working class lass. She's not like Margaret Thatcher was from this lower middle class background, and this induced her with a sense of being an outsider. Not getting money, having to strive, having to really work hard, and having to really get to the top. Even Theresa May, actually, I mean, much as I don't like what she's doing in the UK, she was just the daughter of a vicar. I mean, she had no particularly high-level contacts. Whereas I'm under the impression that, obviously, her father's a High Commissioner to an island nation. Her aunt, I believe I'm right in saying, was an active member of the Labour Party.
I don't have that information, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah, something like that. So, and clearly she would have made high-level contacts at Blair and so on. So the impression I get is that it's almost a sort of a sort of aristocrat almost of New Zealand who's got to this position. As I say, I don't know. I'm sure if I met her I'd feel terribly sorry for her and want to give her a hug. But I from what I know of her, I don't think she's suitable for what she's doing, and I think it's very damaging to a country that's as an Englishman, that's our kin, our people, it's not good. I don't know. I can't comment on these various complex associations which you come up with. I'm afraid I just don't know about it, and I certainly wasn't aware of this paedophile scandal you talk about in 2007 in the City of London Police. I've never heard of that. But what we did have in the UK in terms of conspiracies, and I'm going to talk about this on my YouTube channel, The Jolly Heretic, tomorrow, is these people in high positions who are all paedophiles or ebophiles or sexual abusers. Very, Jimmy Savile, Rolf Harris, all of these people. Have you heard of Rolf Harris in New Zealand?
Yeah, actually, I was down in Wellington filming a protest one time, and we were having some shisha in a lounge, and they had a big picture of Rolf Harris on the wall, and we were like going to the bar. Hey guys, you know what this guy's responsible for, eh? You still loving his music?
Sexually abused 9-year-old. And there's lots of politicians. There was called Sir Cyril Smith. There was a guy called Greville Janner. There's quite a lot of them that suspected even Ted Heath. And then if it's a conspiracy theorist's dream, because there was this botched inquiry into it, and all these various judges that were involved. I think one of them was in New Zealand, possibly actually, had to resign, and all these things, and police cover-ups and all this. I mean, this is something that really does speak of a conspiracy, because it's obvious that people in power did know that these people were had these proclivities, and felt it best to just say nothing because they also have power. Or they just kind of felt it best to say nothing because it wasn't considered that bad in those days. And it's only retrospectively that it is. So you can see how you do have genuine conspiracies. I can't comment on whether it's conspiracies. I think it's just hysteria. It's like Diana.
Well, I was kind of thinking it's like conspiracy is human history, because somebody was telling me this, and I was like sitting in a history class one time, and I go, okay, I got to memorize the dates of early modern England. This is when King Charles came in. This is when King blah, blah, blah came in. You know, that sort of thing, and it was just names and dates. It wasn't character. It wasn't story. It wasn't intrigue. And what's problematic is that's not how history is. History is conspiracy. History is intrigue. That's why it's so intriguing all the time, and it's part of our natural makeup, I think, to not only believe and look for conspiracies and patterns and things like that, but to engage in them as well. And I'll just define what I mean by that by just giving you a simple example. A conspiracy is two people working together to disadvantage somebody else without that somebody else realizing that they're doing it. My sister Marcia was sitting in between my sister Janine and my brother Ben. My sister Janine would tap Marcia on the shoulder and she'd say, "Watch out, Marcia! Ben's going to steal some of the food off your plate." And Marcia would like try to cover her bowl from Ben, and then Janine would help herself to some of the plate. And then Ben would go, "Watch out, Marcia, Janine's going to steal some of your food." And then she'd cover it from Janine, and then he'd help himself to her food, that kind of thing. So we have a natural instinct to go for conspiracy, but I think people don't realize that there's this thing called convergence theory, not conspiracy theory, but convergence theory. The analogy is that a shark feeding frenzy is occurring. You're bleeding, you're in the water, you're surrounded by sharks. Now, are the sharks all working together, or are they working for themselves and simply share the same target? You.
Well, yes, indeed. You can see how the two would cross over. It's like with if you're being attacked by a swarm of bees, that's a conspiracy because they are communicating with each other using pheromones and things like that. Whereas if you're being attacked by, I don't know, some
Oh, but they wouldn't be able to do that without you noticing, is the thing. It's to conspire.
You wouldn't notice they were communicating because you can't smell the pheromones or indeed interpret them, so you wouldn't know that.
You know, actually, that's a good point.
But so yeah, I see. But you're from quite a large family, then, are you? So four kids.
Raised Irish Catholic, but apparently now that I don't follow that religious upbringing, that means I've got probably a little bit of mental problems, which I agree with.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, being not religious is correlated with autism, and aspects of autism. That is true. And drug involvement as well would be consistent with perhaps that. But yeah, I think I've got to have to wrap it up because it's midnight here. But it's it's extraordinary. What is it? What is it where you are? It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. Oh gosh, that's amazing. I don't this. But yeah, I was very interested in it. As I say, I did a religious studies degree, and I find Jacinda Ardern a fascinating character, a really fascinating character, not in a good way. A fascinating character because I think she's this, to put it bluntly, this high anxiety, emotionally conflicted, former religious fundamentalist lactating woman is not what is needed in terms of the psychological attributes of all of those things. In the crisis that you are in, and I hope that New Zealand, as I said to you before, and I've only have very limited contact with it. I just had a lovely teacher at school who was a Kiwi. That's my only contact. But and I hate flying long distance, so I'm unlikely to ever go there. But I sincerely hope things get back to normal. things get better. That's all I can say, because it's not good. It's not, and I hope that you get no more knocks on the door in the middle of the night from the Stasi.
Well, that makes two of us. Well, in fact, that makes three of us, because my wife, that was another thing as well. I'm not sure if the police realise that they're not just stressing me out, and I've got like a panic disorder and that kind of thing because of getting busted by the police, but they're freaking my wife out as well, and I really don't like that, because that's a situation that's completely outside of my control and is entirely my fault at the same time. So I'm...
Yes, I know what you mean. I've experienced a similar thing with my own. It's a particularly nasty thing to do. To go for the wife or indeed the children, as you have with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's a British politician who's a very, very pro-Brexit, and these social justice warrior campaigners approached his children and told his children in front of him what a dreadful man their daddy was. Nasty things to do. Of course, most of these social justice warriors don't have children because they're mutants and they're not interested in such normal things as having children.
Just before you go, you've used the word mutant to describe people a number of times, and I wanted exactly the definition of what you mean by that.
Well, what I mean by, perhaps I'm using it slightly pejoratively, I'm talking about this concept of spiteful mutation, this concept whereby under conditions of Darwinian selection we're selected into this norm, and then there are increasing deviations from that since the Industrial Revolution, because all of these people that would have died out, who would have carried these mutations, these negative mutations, would have not passed on their genes, would have died young or whatever. And it's not my idea. I don't take the credit. It's my colleague Michael Woodley's a concept, the spiteful mutation. This idea that as we reduce child mortality from 40% to 1%, you're going to get all of these mutations of the mind, which will make people think in a way that an evolution is maladaptive, what he calls spiteful mutations. And you'll get more and more people will carry these, and then, to make it worse, they will, as I said to you earlier, affect non-carriers, and thus alter the way that society operates in a maladaptive direction. And that's what I think is going on with people who are advocating ideologies where they're saying that you shouldn't have children, that it's wrong. There are people, antinatalists they're called. You shouldn't have children. You shouldn't. It's as humanity should destroy itself, or European man should destroy itself, or this kind of thing. Your white males should destroy themselves, and this is a fundamentally maladaptive way of thinking, which is probably partly a product of mutation. With regard to those that are the most fervent holders of those views, and so that's why I use the term mutant. That's what I mean. And indeed, we did a study, myself and a number of colleagues, called "The Mutant Says in His Heart There Is No God," where we show that atheism is correlated with all of these various markers of mutation, such as autism, such as left-handedness, which is often a marker of mutation because we're meant to be normally right-handed. Such as schizophrenia, such as even having asymmetrical hands is correlated with not adhering to the form of religion which was dominant under evolution, strong Darwinian selection, that is to say, the collective worship of a moral god or gods. So that's what I mean by it. And someone that was as elevated in anxiety as Jacinda Ardern, and who has fertility problems, strikes me as and who rejects religiosity, despite being brought up in it, strikes me as perhaps being an example of this, and that then even normal New Zealanders, she can spread her hysteria by inducing female police officers to wear the hijab or whatever. Which is a sign. It's ironic that she's so left-wing. It's a sign of a patriarchal culture. These females are supposed to cover up in Islamic societies because Islamic societies are so low in trust that there's concern that they'll be basically in a polygamous society. You have all these men, gangs of men that can't find a wife, and so of course they're walking around horny all the time, and therefore you have to have purdah. You have to protect females, or they'll get raped. And so that's why they're chaperoned. It's why they're covered up, and the hair is sexually attractive, and then they cover it up. Indeed, cover up the face, cover up wear the full-on burqa and cover up everything. It's a symbol of a patriarchal system, and that's what she's been raised in, a patriarchal system, which is why I find it particularly fascinating, her reaction to it. patriarchal, formerly polygamous system. But
Indeed.
anyway,
You're getting a bit tired now. It's time to plug your. We're going to plug your YouTube channel, brother. Please do so.
Oh, well, okay, my YouTube channel is called The Jolly Heretic, and I do my best once a week to do a video to engage in various controversial academic topics that other people daren't touch. My most recent one was on the relationship between religiousness and IQ, which I found is bogus. Everyone says that religious people are stupid based on this data. I found my research indicates it's bogus. I've done one on Islam in Finland. I've done one on how we're getting less intelligent. I've done one on the evolutionary reasons for homosexuality and paedophilia. I've done one on why social justice warriors are physically unattractive. That got quite a few views. And I'm going to look tomorrow at this paedophilia ascendancy that we've had in the UK. I'm going to look at that. I might do one on Jacinda at some point as well. Although, to be fair, I've pretty much said all I have to say about her here, so perhaps I won't. But so yeah, so do have a look at the Jolly Heretic if you're interested in such things, and subscribe. And it really helps if people subscribe. People that don't do YouTube channels don't know this, but we actually get more advertising revenue if you subscribe. So it really helps us subscribe to me and subscribe to Vince. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. And if you like that stuff, you might be interested in my books as well, which you'll see about on the channel. But yeah, good luck to New Zealand. I think that's all I can. I've just finished a biography of Churchill's headmaster. It's called Churchill's Headmaster, the sadist who nearly saved the British Empire. His name was Herbert Snade Kinnersley, and his brother Thomas Alfred Snade Kinnersley, who died in, I think, 1874, was a governor of some area of New Zealand. He was in the Navy, and then he got tuberculosis or something and had to leave the Navy, and he went and lived in New Zealand. He was a gold prospector, and in the end they put him in charge of some area of New Zealand, and he was a fascinating guy. He was accused by a newspaper of going to the races with prostitutes, so he marched into the newspaper editor's office with a whip, and an apology was published in the following edition. There was another case where there was this mad woman with two guns in this particular town going around shooting, one of these frontier towns, going around, shooting and going mad and saying she was going to kill somebody. And he got her to go into a pub and then ordered her 2 brandies. He gave her 1 brandy, she dropped 1 gun. He gave her another brandy, dropped the other gun. He grabbed both guns and arrested her. So he was a very witty fellow. But Thomas Alfred Snade Kinnersley. But anyway, it's been a very interesting conversation, Vince. And as I say, I just hope that tonight you go to bed, your neck gets better, and you're not dragged out of bed in the middle of the night by the thought police. That would be awful.
Yes, it's not ideal.
There's an understatement. It's less than ideal, but hopefully things will. That's the thing when you get these periods of hysteria. The Blair government in Britain was a period of national hysteria, as far as I'm concerned. The Blair, of course, Jacinda worked, and who she presumably looked up to. And now we're looking back on it. We look back and we think, oh my God, how did this happen? How could we do these things? How could we go to war in Iraq? How could we get dragged into this? What were we thinking? It's terrible. It's like how you feel when you've had loads and loads to drink, and you think back the next day and you think, oh my God, what did I do? What did I do?
That's actually happened to me several times, and then when people tell me the story, I go, man, I was really kind and respectful. That sounds exactly like me when I'm drunk.
Well, New Zealand needs to sober up. Maybe that's the thing. There'll be a hangover.
We've got an alcoholism problem like you won't believe.
I mean metaphorically. I don't mean.
No. I'm talking about metaphorically and literally. All right. Why not both? Why limit yourself? That's the New Zealand drinking culture. Why limit yourself?
All right. Well, nice to speak to you, and goodbye.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, brother. All right, there was Ed Dutton, ladies and gentlemen, the Jolly Heretic himself. What a great show, eh? So, what was the other things that I was wanting to talk about before then? I've got a sore neck. I've got more Christchurch stuff going up. It's like, oh my God, baby, it's crazy down here right now. And it'd be so ideal if I didn't have to live in fear of just doing my job. It's like, hey, Vinny, yeah, what's your job? I don't know anymore. What do you mean, what's your job? Well, my job used to be look at evidence and tell people what was in it. And now that's illegal. So, what what am I supposed to do with my life? You know, and I'm wondering, like, this show right here, you know, talking about the lactating mutant Jacinda Ardern. Am I going to get this channel pulled? Like, can we just, like, calm down? Please don't ban me. Please don't ban me. I swear I'm not trying to hurt anybody here. And nobody's going to get physically, you know, violated or anything, man. Just please don't ban me. You know, that's the kind of questioning nature that I've got at this point in time. It's scaring the hell out of me. But the other thing... My God, it was just such a frightening freaking time, and it was just like 90% of my subscribers just gone into nothing right at this crucial time in history, you know, that kind of thing. Right when we're trying to cover all the stuff, and it's like, you sons of... And this is the second time this has happened. One time it happened after we were exposing the hell out of a guy named Pete Santilli for stealing my guerrilla media. A whole bunch of false flags that he did on my channel got me taken out for a couple of months. And then, what was it, John Key himself, when I did the John Key Exposed in 6 Minutes video and did his entire past and stuff like that, that got my YouTube channel taken down for 3 whole months. And now my main YouTube channel is also down for 3 whole months. Right in the middle of this crisis. And here I am broadcasting on the backup channel to like less than 1/10 of the subscribers, a fraction of the audience. And it's really, it's quite depressing, you know? It's like you get to the top of a mountain and you're feeling great. And then all of a sudden the sand shifts from beneath you and you tumble all the way back down. You have to start the whole freaking process again. You know, that's what it feels like right now with them restricting my YouTube channel. So if there is anything you can do to help me, ladies and gentlemen, whether by donating to setting up an automatic payment into the Kiwi Bank or the PayPal on the homepage, or the Patreon, the Super Chats and things like that, they have a little bit of a lag on them, so they'll take like over a month or something like that to process through. But I've got to actually say that I really do appreciate all the people in the chat room as well. And we're looking for a guy named Sound Minds. It was like in all capitals. He was one of the admins for my other channel. And he probably doesn't know what's happened to us. I mean, we got Perth Observer came here from the other channel. He's one of the admins in the chat room there. Hey, Perth. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. As well as Kitty. We've got a number of people. And also Richard Silver. Just at the beginning of this show, we made him another admin as well. And the reason for having so many admins in the chat room is because, hey, this is such a contentious issue and the emotions are so high, and we're using the chicken approach, okay? Somebody comes in, they're being nasty, they're saying things that are mean and stuff like that, and they're just upsetting everybody. Block, 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 block. Like a chicken, you know. That's how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. All right, thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. You can support the show at thevinnyeastwoodshow.com and look in the links in the description for the Facebook pages and all the other associated stuff. And I realised that I have never plugged my band as well on the thing. Vinny and the Vendettas. There's also links in the description for there as well. Definitely want to sing and dance and have some fun and that kind of thing, and I'll probably have to write a song for the victims of Christchurch as well, and do a wee bit of a tribute with the boys, because it's like I felt nothing watching that video, and then when I'm down there and with the people who've experienced it, that kind of thing, I came back and it's with me, you know, that pain, that grief, that sadness is with me now. And I don't know how I'll get rid of it, but I'm glad that I'm feeling it, because that way I'll actually have an appropriate, genuine response to what happened, unlike the disingenuous virtue signaling from our lactating mutant Prime Sinister. I love that term. I'm going to keep using that forever. Ed, for giving me that gem. Oh, God. Okay, calm down, Vinny. You're a professional cunt. the lactating fucking... Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the VinnyEastwoodShow.com. It's Vinny with a Y because it's the most important question, and Eastwood go ahead, make my news. It's the lighter side of genocide. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't make it fun. Otherwise, what's the point?